You know you want to write a book, but you have no idea where you want to start. There are so many unknowns, and now you're worried that if you go about it the wrong way, your story's going to be terrible. Well, I've written 8 books, and in this video, I'm going to take you through the process I use to go from a vague idea to a finished draft. The first thing you're going to want to do is open up a new page in Microsoft Word or whatever software it is that you like to use for writing. It's not a big deal. And then you're just going to start writing sort of bullet points or point form with all of your ideas. Just throw them down. Don't care about coherency or organization or whatnot. Just start putting stuff down. It's world building, characters, setting, story related stuff. Just every single thing you can think of that might be related to this story, including plot and different stuff that might happen in it. The number one thing here is don't put too much pressure on it. Just be lighthearted, creative, have fun, and just sort of put everything onto paper so that you can see it in one spot. After you got all that down, you should have a better idea of what shape your story is going to take, who it's about, and what's going to happen. Where I like to go from there, you can just, like I said, you can put every single thing you can think of in the heat of the moment, right? When you dry up or after you got everything down, I like to make another separate document. That's going to be all of your character sheets. So I open that one up, this new document, and I'll write my character's name, their age, and what they look like. What they look like is reasonably important because your draft might take a really long time to make. And then who knows if 3 months into writing, you're going to forget what your original intentions were with their looks and whatnot. So just start out with that basic general info about them. Next, you're going to write about their backstory. Start with covering what kind of family they're from and all that. And now you're going to go into 2 to 3 major events from their backstory, stuff that happened. These should be really important defining events that influence who they are, how they think, and how they act. These are going to be foundational things that are very formative to them. And you're going to want to give each one about a paragraph, just like a quick little paragraph. You don't have to go into too much detail with it. You can in your story. You don't necessarily have to, right? Even if you don't directly acknowledge certain aspects of their backstory, fleshing it out does help you get a deeper understanding of who they are, how they'll act, and the things that they'll cause to happen. At the end of all that, I like to write down 1 or 2 lines about what the character's like today in general, and it should be sort of focused on and through a lens of how those events have created the situation today or turned them into who they are today. And finally, you'll write down your character's want and need. The want should be a more surface level thing, and it should be like a very conscious desire, right? The need should be the underlying thing that drives and informs that want. Maybe they know what it is, maybe they don't. That part is irrelevant unless it's a part of their personality, right? Whether the type of person that's aware enough to know what the underlying need is. Now, the difference between a need and want, it might sound like a very subtle distinction, but an example of it would be somebody who wants revenge, for example, might need to come to terms with something that happened in the past, or, a way that they've been hurt or something. Somebody who, we're going to look at this through a fantasy lens for the next one, somebody that wants to live up to the name of their house and potentially live up to the reputation of the line of kings that have preceded them, their ancestors, they probably need to step into their role and learn to trust themselves and understand that they are capable and they can do it. Like I said, that is a very subtle distinction, but in a lot of ways, that is kind of where the nuance lies. And another thing, too, is that in a positive character arc, in the end, they will typically achieve this need, and that unlocks the good ending for them, whether or not they actually achieve their want. In a negative character arc, on the other hand, the closer they get to their want, typically the further they get from their need, and they might even win in the end. They might get exactly what they want, but it's still technically the bad ending. Even if they feel like they won, and even if they feel like they got exactly what they're looking for, it is not strictly speaking in their best interest. Walter White in Breaking Bad's a pretty good example of this. What he wants are things like money, power, and respect. What he needs is a sense of fulfillment. Now, no matter how much of his wants he gets, it approximates that sense of fulfillment, but it never fully captures or encapsulates the needs. So any victories he has in that sense do ring kind of hollow. I could go more into like explicit depth with, negative character arcs and the want and need interacting using Breaking Bad, but I don't necessarily want to spoil anything for anyone, so we'll move on. When you're done your character sheet for your protagonist and your top couple most important characters, it'll probably be like 2/3 to a quarter of a page. That's perfectly fine. That's totally normal. And you can just keep going with your next character, all on the same document, of course. I like to keep all of my character sheets on the same document just so it's easier and cleaner, and I got one reference point. It's so much better to have fewer documents open when you're actually writing, a lot less clutter. When you get to your less important characters too, if you find them to be worthy of their own character sheet, you could just do like 1 or 2 sentences. Really not a big deal. Just, kind of understand who they are. If you feel like that character is recurring enough that they're even worth that sheet. Now, once you have all your character sheets done, that's going to really help provide a lot of context and inform your process going forward. I'd say after that, you're pretty ready to put the finishing touches on your story. So I like to go back to that document where I have all of my ideas, all of my little bullet form notes, and I'm going to finish writing down as much as I can. Plot stuff, world building stuff, anything else that's going to become relevant in that story, of course. And you don't got to get completely finished there. Once you're running out of steam, what I like to do is make a page break in that same document. So everything will go to a new blank page that separates my notes from where I'm actually about to write my plot. And on there, on that new fresh page, that's where I like to start plotting things out and writing down the different events as they're going to happen in order in my novel. So as I said, this part is your outline. This is your plot-related stuff. And you do not want to wait until you have 100% of everything figured out. If you have even like 20 to 30% and your brainstorm isn't going as well as you would like it to continue on, you're ready to start your outline. Just put everything in order. And once you get to a gap, like let's say you got let's say you got like the first 3 chapters figured out, chapter 1, 2, 3, and then you don't know what's going on until chapter 7. What I like to do is I just like to press the enter button a couple times and give a little bit of blank space. And within that blank space, I'll just be ready to insert whatever I come up with later. But I write out every single thing I've got, beginning to end. I'll even write the actual ending of the book if I know what it is. And I might end up with a bunch of barren spots. But seeing everything in order, seeing how it progresses, it does put things more into perspective for you. And that right there could cause you to go, oh, okay, now I actually see how I can get from this point to this point. Now I see what chapter 4 is maybe, and now I can see what chapter 13 is maybe, or this scene, that scene, and I know how I want these characters to interact here. It is a process. It is an always changing thing, and it is a moving target. Don't put too much pressure on it. And just like I told you, don't wait to have every single idea before you start outlining. Don't wait until your outline's 100% finished before you start actually writing your book. If you have 20 to 30% of a book outlined, you are ready, at least in my opinion, to start writing the actual book. If you have the beginning chapter, or maybe 2 or 3, that's more than enough. A lot of people, they'll treat the outline like it's gospel, and they'll never vary from it at all. The problem is a story is a messy thing. Characters, if you give them autonomy and let them make decisions and let them influence your plot, they will end up changing what you've got. The most I've ever had plotted out before I started writing a book was maybe 70% of it. And one time I even had, it was only about 60 in the specific book I'm about to talk about, but I started writing the book. I got about halfway through, and then I had pretty much everything else already set up, right? By the time I was at my halfway point, I had gotten past all the blank spots in my outline. My characters made such a vastly different decision that I had to throw out the majority of what remained of my outline. Everything just kind of went for a big, huge loop, and it went nothing like I expected it. Your story can change and grow as you write it, and it could become vastly different to what you have. And that's actually a good thing. You do want to afford it that ability to sort of tell you what shape it needs to take. When you're ready to get started, which, like I said, could be only 30% of an outline in my opinion, you're going to want to open a new document. You're going to name it, either give it the name you already have or name it just the protagonist's story. It's not a huge deal what your name is right now. You don't even have to decide that until you're pretty much ready to publish. But, put down the name of the story, specify that it's draft 1, making very clear and accurate document names and having good file keeping is very, very important. It's hidden OP. It is how you stay in line, how you don't lose stuff, miss things, miss a bunch of progress that you had, and now you got to restart a big section. So the title, which could just be protagonist's name, draft 1, and then in brackets, you're going to put the date that you started. So month, whatever number the day is, and then year in brackets. Or whatever way you like to organize it, doesn't matter at all. Now the big question is, how much should you write and how often? A lot of that is up to you, and it does depend on your situation, to be honest. But I will give you some general guidelines and some tips for what's going to help lend itself to success. You're going to want to try to write as often as you can. I try to aim for 7 days a week. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes it's 4 or 5. And there are scenarios where I'm handling like back-end publishing stuff or whatnot, where maybe I don't get to write for a couple weeks. Or if I'm in the editing process, maybe it takes a couple months even because I'm editing a couple books and doing back end publishing stuff. That's not a factor for this current scenario, though, right? Like I say, most important thing is write as much as you can. Aim for 7 days. 4 or 5 is still great. You don't got to feel terrible if you don't hit 7. Even then, though, maybe you can't hit 4 or 5. It's figuring out what works for you is going to be what finds you success. Kind of learning what sort of author you are and getting into the flow of things is 100% what is going to separate the people who finish writing from the people who get 10,000 words in and drop it. I'm not 100% sure how busy you are in specific, but you will have to balance it with stuff like school, jobs, maybe you got kids or other obligations or whatnot. Regardless, my personal recommendation, the thing that I would say is important above all else is momentum, right? That's why I find that if I actually hit 7 days a week, things are going to be flowing for the next couple weeks. I'm going to be in the zone. Things are going to be feeling great. So you're going to want to try to hit that sort of day mark as much as possible. How many words should you write in a day? That depends. For me, I aim for 3,000. Sometimes I get more, sometimes less. Sometimes I'll be at 2,000, and that's a totally sufficient day. The thing that matters is that I actually got in and wrote it. I'm pretty happy with a 2,000 word day. A 2,500 word day, also very happy with. And on the rare occasion where I hit around 4,000 or a little bit less, I'd say I'm pretty much absolutely ecstatic. There will be days where you only get like 500 words though, or maybe 1,000 if you're lucky. And that happens to me reasonably often too. You don't got to feel bad about that, of course. The main thing is even a very short, unproductive, or bad day of writing is still very useful in the grand scheme of things. It is still keeping that momentum. It is still keeping you in the zone. It's keeping your brain focused on that. And even on a subconscious level, if you were like very distracted that day. And it sort of keeps your streak going if you want to make a comparison to that. A bonus metric, they say that a writer should be able to write anywhere between 500 to 1,000 words per hour. They say that if you're at 500, you should be working on getting up there and that it's not that good. 750 is apparently reasonably average or normal, and 1,000 words per hour is supposed to be pretty good. We're talking like new, fresh writing, not like fix-ups for something that's already pre-existing. Full disclosure though, I myself am on the lower end of that spectrum. I tend to be like a 500 words an hour kind of guy unless I'm really in the zone or like really feeling it. Sometimes I'm actually less than 500 words an hour if I'm in like a tough spot. There's some people that will make videos online where they're talking about how they wrote 10,000 words in a day. That could never be me. I'm not that kind of fast person. Those people, interestingly enough, tend to not have too many books out. I actually just thought about that right now. So I don't know, maybe something's not adding up, or maybe they're keeping it personal, like to themselves and not publishing. But it's not necessarily about a rush. It's about making sure that you're consistent and you're actually doing it, because a lot of those people that do get like 5,000 word days or more, They get burnout and then they won't write for a couple weeks because they were on the computer for like 16 hours straight and now the whole entire world is blurry. The average book that gets published today is between 60 to 90,000 words, sometimes more, sometimes less, depends on your genre, of course. Things like sci-fi and fantasy are going to tend to be longer. And the average chapter that I like to go for, at least, is 3,000 words, sometimes more, sometimes less. There's a lot of flexibility and it's not a huge deal. Unless you're in sci-fi and fantasy, the general wisdom is to kind of keep it on the lower side, like, 2,000 to 2,500. But like I said, it's not the hugest deal. As long as you don't have readers exhausted halfway through your chapter, begging for mercy, you're probably fine. As long as your reader isn't finishing your chapter and going, oh, wow, okay, I can read a little bit more. I have time to read, but I can't persevere through that much more reading. Then as long as they're not thinking stuff like that, then your chapter length is fine. Beta readers will be able to tell you if you're screwing up. Now I'd like to give you two really important pieces of reference. At least in my opinion, they're very important pieces of reference. Stephen King, very famous author, probably like one of the three most famous authors that are currently living, I would argue. He likes to write 2,000 words a day, and he likes to write 7 days a week, and he'll do that over the course of 4 hours. So he treats it kind of like a part-time job where he chooses to work every day of the week kind of thing. Even in his peak, that was kind of what he says, at least, is what he was sort of feeling out. Now, you'll notice, by the way, 2,000 words in 4 hours means that Stephen King is actually writing 500 words an hour. And like I said, that's technically on the lower end of what an author is supposed to be able to do. And he is Stephen King. Brandon Sanderson also, I believe he writes 7 days a week, or at least tries to, but he has said very explicitly multiple times that his goal is 3,000 words a day. So a little bit more than Stephen King. Stephen King's at 2,000. Brandon likes to be at 3. And you'll notice these numbers aren't crazy. These numbers aren't absurd. They're not unobtainable. It is the consistency that I was talking about. It is that being in a state of momentum that makes them so prolific. So you don't even need to write every day. Those guys are pumping out multiple 100,000 word books multiple times a year. But stick to it as much as you can. Keep that momentum, like I said, and just go for it. And don't worry about a bunch of stuff that other people are saying about how much more they're writing than you. One last thing that you need to know as well is writing a book for the first 10,000 words is super fun. It's great. And then all of a sudden it's terrible. It becomes an absolute drag. Everything just feels dumb and forced, and it feels like it was a good idea in your head, and now that you're actually getting to it, it sucks. Don't listen to that voice, right? All you're going to want to do is move on to the next project, but that's a massive noob trap. And I can tell you from experience, the second you move on to your next project, same thing's going to happen. You're going to be like, wow, this sucks. I just got to move on to the next thing. You're not going to finish a book if you keep hopping between your projects, and you are not going to find success if you're not seeing any of them through to the end. No matter how great your ideas are, it's going to feel like a drag at some point. It's going to feel like an absolute slog at some point. You just have to persevere. And when you get like maybe 60 to 70% of the way through, that's kind of when you hit your second wind, almost like you're running a marathon or like doing some kind of long distance competition. you really do, like I said, hit that second wind and it brings you through to the end. So just power through, be committed, and do your best to stay as consistent as possible. Keep pushing through, keep writing, and finish. It'll teach you way more about writing than anything else ever would. Remember, too, you can do it. You just have to actually get out there and do the work. And that's all you need to know to finish your first novel. If you follow this advice and some of these tips, you will have a finished draft in no time. That's all I have for today. So as always, if you got any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment section below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.